Hello everyone and welcome to the first video in the new series that I'm doing. I had talked about it a little bit and gotten quite a few suggestions, but essentially what I want to do with this is take a closer look at some of these songs as a whole instead of just looking at individual vocal parts the way I'm doing in the vocal analysis series. So since this is the first video, it's a little experimental. I'm still kind of working out the best way to organize these, but I think what I'm going to do, at least for now, is kind of divide it into three sections. The first one talking specifically about the musical structure of the song, the instrumentation, how it's put together. The second part focusing on the vocal work, particularly the unison vocal work that I really don't get to talk much about in the character vocal analysis videos. And the third looking at lyrics. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on lyrics because that's, again, something a little different that you could really deconstruct if you wanted to, but a lot of these songs are lyrically very thematic and relate to the characters and the units and what's going on in the story at the time, so I think it makes sense to at least look into it a little bit. So that's the general idea. Overall, I want these videos to be a little bit shorter, ones that I can put out a little more often because the vocal analysis videos take a long time to put together and get out. So if I could release these weekly or something, that would be nice. Again, it depends on how real life goes, but we'll see. And since I had about 3 or 4 comments asking me to look at Genuine Revelation, I decided to do that one first. So we'll get right into talking about the music. And again, I was debating how deeply to go into this because it could get very technical, but that can get a little boring if you're not really interested in music theory. So we're going to touch a little bit on those aspects, but I'll try not to ramble on about it. Essentially, the core of a lot of popular music songs comes down to something called chord progression. And chord progression is just a repetitive pattern of chords that make up a base for the melody to go over top of it. And just like there are a finite number of notes, there are a finite number of ways you can put chords together. And a lot of times, if these chord progressions become very common, we actually have names for them. And for most songs, they won't keep the exact same chord progression all the way through, and they'll go into modifications like adding sevenths or other ways you can vary the chord notes to make it sound more interesting. But at its core, Genuine Revelation uses what is known as the Royal Road chord progression. And stripped down to the bare essentials, the Royal Road chord progression is major fourth, major fifth, minor third, minor sixth, which in this case, in the key of A major, would translate to D major, E major, C sharp minor, F sharp minor. And in the last 20 or 25 years, the Royal Road chord progression has become incredibly common in Japanese pop and rock music. You will hear a lot of idol music that uses it, a lot of anime themes that use it. I don't think anyone's quite sure why it has become kind of the go-to for Japanese music producers and composers, but it's not nearly so common in Western music, and I think part of that is because Western music has a tendency to always go back to the tonic. And the tonic is just the chord that goes along with the key that the song is in. So if this song, for instance, being in A major, the tonic chord or the one chord would be an A chord. And the Royal Road progression does not use the tonic at all in its basic format. But like I said, you still get to hear it in Western music, and what I've done is I put together this little compilation that I've played of songs that use this chord progression. So the basic chord progression, no sevenths, no modifications to any of the chords, sounds like this. And what I did was keep the left hand playing that chord progression while playing the melody of a few different songs in the right hand. So we end up with this. So in order, that's Genuine Revelation, Snowhalation, Never Gonna Give You Up, Fortnight, and It's Gonna Be Me, all of which use that basic chord progression or a variation of it within the choruses of the songs. So chord progressions have always been really interesting to me because you end up with a lot of music that sounds quite different, but when you break it down, it has the same base, essentially. And Genuine Revelation has a lot of different chords that come in at different times, but for the chorus, that is what they're using. And interestingly, what they do for the verses is a modified version of that, where they actually switch the last 2 chords around. So we end up with a major fourth, major fifth, minor sixth, and then a minor third. So it kind of has this rise and fall feeling to it that the normal order of the chord progression doesn't. So that ends up sounding like this. when you put the melody on top of it. So that's as deep as I'm going to go into the technical side of it, but gives you an idea kind of how these songs are put together. And I've had some people asking me to compare different songs, so what I'm going to do, or what I'm going to try and do, is keep a list of the songs that I've done with the chord progressions they use, and then I can compare it as I go along, because I think it's much easier to work backwards than to try and pick out random songs and see what fits. So in future videos, if there's anything we've talked about before, I'll mention it just so you can compare the songs that way as well. In terms of the actual music, I would say the Genuine Revelation sounds more like a Fine song than any of the other groups that the members of this group eventually became, which you would think makes sense because technically at the time they were Fine, but comparing it to something like Dawning Angels, you can hear a lot more Eden influence in Dawning Angels compared to this one. This one could be a straight up Fine song as they are now, with the exception of what's basically a rhythm backing band. So for the most part, Fine songs, the instrumentation is very light, it's very high, there's not much of a low end or a bass end to it, because they rely a lot on orchestral strings. Like that's, Fine and orchestral strings are kind of synonymous at this point when it comes to OnStar's music. And this song does something really interesting because you do have the orchestral strings that are there and they're prevalent, but there is also a full drum kit going for most of it. There's an electric guitar, there's a lot of piano sections, there's rhythm guitar sections. So they're using what's basically a rock band bass with the strings over top of it to give it more of that Fine sound to it. So it's certainly Fine, but it's Fine with like an edge that most Fine songs don't have. And while the intro does go more into the strings, there's a bit of syncopation within the rhythms, there's a little bit of triplet action going on with the strings. As soon as they hit the first verse, you get into this, what sounds like a kick drum or a bass drum doing this double drum beat, which already creates much more of that low end than you would typically hear in a Fine song. And I'll just say I'm very thankful that all the instrumental versions of these songs are easy to access because that makes this so much easier. But as it goes along, you can hear there's still this build within the string section, particularly in the chorus when you have what sounds like sort of this synth or this modulated piano bell sound that's kind of playing along with the melody. And then at the end of the lines, you get this really nice string section that comes in to follow the melody. And if you listen to the instrumental versions, you'll see that the backing track doesn't always have an instrument that is playing the same melody as the vocal lines, but it does here, and it kind of re-emphasizes that string section and means that you're constantly aware of it, even with the other instruments happening in the background. There's a pretty significant solo section that does have an electric guitar solo and a piano solo. The piano solo almost reads jazzy to me at times, which is really interesting. Because while Fine has done songs like Tempest Night that kind of go into the jazz swing side of things, it's not really their typical style. And when we get into the bridge, we have this really big build within the percussion. That leads us into the last chorus where the music kind of pulls out, and then we have this bell that's quite prevalent, especially if you listen to the instrumental track. You can hear this very rhythmic, consistent bell that's happening in the background, and then the rhythm guitar comes in again, and that builds it up to the last chorus. So I would say the instrumentation in this one is really interesting because while there's no real denying what unit it belongs to, even if you just listen to it without the vocalists, the inclusion of especially the drum kit kind of gives it this edge that Fine songs usually don't have. And if Eden is contributing anything to this song, I would say it's probably that. So vocally, I think this song is very strong. It is fairly early in terms of when it was released, and at the time we didn't really have a whole lot of songs that went off unit, so it was kind of a treat to get anything that wasn't just the typical unit formula as they were. And I think the biggest difference between this and a traditional Fine song vocally is that, and we talked about this a little bit in the Eiichi vocal video, but Fine has a lot of character voices, particularly with Wataru and Tori having really strong character voices. So Yuzuru and Eiichi can't really do a whole lot other than try and moderate what's happening with those two. Whereas in this case, the vocals span a pretty wide range, but for the most part, they're not character voices in the same way. And Nagisa's voice is a lot deeper than anything that Fine normally has. So just like the music has more of a low end than their normal songs, the vocals have more of a low end. They've got this bass that usually doesn't happen in their songs, and they can play around with that a little bit more. Hiyori, obviously, very strong belter, very good with the high end of things, which still kind of leaves Eiichi and Tsumugi in the middle, but it gives them a little more freedom because they don't really have to hold back the other two, and everyone can kind of blend equally, and you can really hear that when all four of them are singing together. And I will say this now, for as often as Ishikai talks about not being a singer and kind of downplaying his own vocal ability, he is a very good singer. Tsumugi has a very neutral voice, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because it's very nice to listen to and it's very easy to blend with, so he'll basically sound good singing with anyone. And I've talked about before how important having a strong neutral core is for mixing, especially with groups singing together. So having someone like Tsumugi there just makes it very easy for all the voices to work together really well. And again, I'm trying not to go too much into individual voices because that's what the vocal analysis videos are for, but I haven't talked about Tsumugi a whole lot yet, so wanted to get into that at least a little bit. This is another one of those songs where all of the duet lines are mixed in stereo, so if you are listening to it and you are listening to it through headphones, try listening to the duets with one headphone and then the other, and you actually get to hear them as solo lines, which is kind of neat. And they do allow them to go into harmonies in the chorus. Eden is one of those groups that typically does do more harmonies than a lot of the other OnStars groups, but I still wish they do more because I know they're capable of it. You get to hear a little bit of it here, but it's still very timid. And again, this was an earlier song. The producers were a lot less brave when it came to mixing and vocals back then, but they still do it sometimes and then come back to singing unison. So it'd be nice if the entire course was harmony, but at least we get these little snippets of it, and we get to hear it again before the last chorus, and then in the last chorus, or the beginning of the last chorus, when all of the background music fades out, you can really hear the harmonies through those lines. So I think that covers most of the vocal work, or at least the vocal work that I won't get into in the other videos. So the last thing we'll talk about is the lyrics. And the lyrics to Genuine Revelation are interesting because obviously this is a song that took place before the story, but was written after the main story had already been completed and we knew where things were going. So there's a lot of foreshadowing in the lyrics and a lot of references to the war and to what was happening that makes sense because we already knew where the story was going by that point. I think the most interesting is there's one line that's something like, "We have no need for a star that's lost its shine," which obviously is referring to like the lack of motivation that was happening prior to Eiichi deciding to step in and change how things are going. But considering that the unit that eventually unseats him is Trickstar, that line feels very pointed lyrically, and I think that's entirely on purpose. Other than that, this song lyrically also feels very Fine. There's a lot of references to angels and dawn and the morning and all of the things that they typically do have in their songs. Although in this case, it's a little more direct. There's one line that says, "Remove the night and bring morning," which is obviously talking about the war, how they're going to bring this new life to the school, or at least that's what Eiichi's plan was. So Genuine Revelation does feel kind of like a call to action, but it's a call to action that is pushing only the good things without talking about the things that are going on in the background and all of the not so virtuous plans he was setting up in order to, take down the eccentrics and things like that. But in this case, I think having something like the Royal Road chord progression in a song that's using this as its message makes a lot of sense because the chord progression itself has this sense of building. Like, it's very triumphant, and that's at least the impression that this song is supposed to give off, regardless of anything else that's going on around it. If you just heard this song, it's supposed to feel inspiring, and I think it accomplishes that, and that's one more reason why I really like talking about chord progression, because it does add so much to the meaning and the feel behind songs, usually in a very intentional way, and I think in this case it certainly is. And I think that about covers everything that I wanted to talk about. I hope this won't end up being too long, because I do want these videos to be shorter, but once again, I hope that was interesting. I have quite a few songs that people have suggested I take a look at, but if there are ones you want me to do, please feel free to leave those in the comments. And as always, please do like, comment, do all the things that the algorithm wants you to do. I am working on the Nazuna video and I hope to have that out soon, so I will see you next time.